Welcome back. Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has declared that the late former Minister of Defence and leader of the Congress of the People, Mosiuoa Lekota, will be honoured with a special official funeral Category 2. In the 1980s, Lekota was convicted in the Delmas Trial and imprisoned on Robben Island and released after 8 years. Now, Lekota also served as the first Free State Premier and as the Minister of Defence. He went on to co-found the political party, the Congress of the People, or COPE. And Mosiuoa Lekota's official funeral service will be held on Saturday at the Old Grey Sports Centre in Bloemfontein. And joining us to reflect on his political career and just the life and times of Mosiuoa Lekota, we're joined here in studio by Peter-Paul Ngwenya, Mosiuoa Lekota's friend and comrade, as well as Thabiso Ratsomo, who is Lekota's friend and Delmas Trial Co-accused, and he will be joining us virtually shortly. But Peter-Paul Ngwenya, thank you so much for coming through, and my heartfelt condolences to you, because I know that Terra, as he was affectionately known, was a very close friend.
Yes, he was. And in fact, I was at his bedside when he left us. Around about 3 o'clock on Wednesday, I received a call from his son. He said, please, come quickly to the hospital, Waterfall City Hospital. When I got there, he has just left this earth. That was on Wednesday, and I found his wife there and his son. And then, you know what is most surprising is I don't know how the SABC still has to explain this to me, because I got there at about 3:30 in the morning. And I think it was after 4 o'clock, 4:30, then I received a call from the SABC. It was Mzwandile. Now Mzwandile doesn't have my number. And I don't know how he knew that I was at the hospital. But then, of course, I confirmed to him that he had passed away, and then he asked for permission to release the story. And as I was sitting with his wife, she said, it's fine, he can go ahead, and the details would follow.
And, you know, Mr. Ngwenya, I just knew one of the people we had to speak to was you, as someone we've spoken about, Terra Lekota and so many others, yes, with whom you also spent time with on Robben Island. Yeah. But when did you first meet Mosiuoa Lekota?
I first met him in 1970 when I was doing my JC. There's a small town in Northern Natal called Glencoe. And I went to high school in a town called Vryheid, and the school was called Inkamana High School. So when we were traveling back home, we would take a train at Vryheid, and then Glencoe, which was an interchange, then you would take a train there, whether to Durban or to Johannesburg. Now, Terra was living in a place called Ngutu. He was working there as a court interpreter. But I had a friend who had been in Meren Hill with Terra, Victor Mazibuko, who had mentioned his name to me. He says, there is this fellow from Kroonstad. He's quite cheeky, but he's a great footballer. So I was interested to get to know Terra. But also, his wife's sister was my senior at Inkamana High School. So I know of him. That's when I first met him. It was in November of 1970.
And then, you know, so you heard about this cheeky fellow who was a terror on the football field.
Yes.
What were your own first impressions when you met him?
You know, Taylor was a very likable person. He always had a smile on his face, and he made everybody around him feel quite at ease. And I remember at one time I asked Tokyo, said, explain to me what kind of a character this is. All he said, he's just one of us. So I understood. And Terra was committed, he had passion, he was passionate just about everything that he did. whether it was politics, it was sport. And he was a supreme sportsman, by the way. He played every other sport. On the island, he played rugby, he played football, and he participated in all other sports. Obviously, we never had boxing on Robben Island, but I'm sure he would have participated in that as well if it was there. But he was quite a character. I remember the story, and I think I must have shared it with you before. When Nelson Mandela was based at Victor Verster, just before his release, he had the habit of inviting some of us to Victor Verster, and then he would give us an update as to what was happening, how the struggle was unfolding. So on this day, he had invited 5 comrades, and amongst them, it was Terra and Tokyo. So obviously, when you visited Nelson Mandela, you got offered all sorts of things, including alcohol. So when they came back, Tokyo had a bag of rice, you see. So obviously, we were happy that we were going to cook it, and we thought Mandela had given it to them. But we later learned that the authorities complained to Nelson Mandela and said, but what kind of people were here? We looked after them so well, and then they stole all our food. So I asked Tokyo, I said, but why did you do this? You're embarrassing us. Tokyo said, no, it was Terra who said, Twaramo. He was quite naughty at times. Yeah, he was quite naughty at times.
And Terra, Terra was on the island twice, was he?
Yes, he was. He was twice. He was released in 1982, and then he came back in 1985. That's when I really got closer to him, because firstly, he was kept at the general section, him and Popo. They were later moved to the section where we stayed. You remember that I stayed at B section with Tokyo and them. So he then came to live with us. Obviously, there were committees. Robben Island was run by prisoners, and we had all committees of all sorts that were responsible for all the things that had to be done on the island. And then he came then to stay with us, and he belonged to one of the committees. But remember, when Terra came, it was after the state of emergency. And this state of emergency, he was quite instrumental in having the government declaring that state of emergency. Because, and I remember this because this was my birthday on the 3rd of September, when the unrest really began on the Val on the 3rd of September, then it spread throughout the country. So obviously now we were having first-hand information from him, and it was quite exciting because we then realized now that this is the final push. All of us are going to be free. So that's when then I really got to be very, very close to him. Obviously, he was released because he won his appeal. And then we hooked up when I came out of Robben Island myself. And then I traveled the country with him because Terra might have started as a black consciousness man. And there is this belief amongst in certain quarters that people who believe in black consciousness are racist in reverse. So the perfect example to disprove that is Terra Lekota. Terra was completely non-racial, more non-racial than any one of us. So I traveled the whole country with him. We went to Bloemfontein, Durban, Cape Town, because we were invited by our white counterparts who were not sure what's going to become of the country after democracy. And Terra was quite good. It was Terra and a comrade who was no longer with us as well, Ibrahim. We traveled around the country addressing these issues and answering all these questions. So Terra was one of a kind. And people say we value everybody who participated in the struggle, but we value more those who dedicated their life to the struggle. And Terra was such a person.
And the one thing about Terra is that he always spoke his mind, regardless of how unpopular that sentiment may be. That never, pushed him away from his conviction.
When President Thabo resigned on that Sunday, he called all these cabinet members to firstly share with them this is what he was going to do. I think the meeting was in the evening in Pretoria, and then I got a call from Terra, and he asked me to come and see him. I went to Pretoria. It was around about 10 o'clock in the evening. When I left, it was 5 o'clock in the morning. Because I was trying to say to him, the ANC has decided to recall President Thabo Mbeki, but they haven't recalled any one of you. So, especially you, you've just been our chairman. So, it will be a huge blow if you would be seen to be abandoning the ANC, and now you are also going to remove yourself from the cabinet. Wait until maybe a new president comes in. He told me, in the morning he was almost very close to beating me up because I was insisting that he cannot, on his own, the country and its people had chosen him to serve in government. So he cannot now, because President Thabo Mbeki has been recalled, I could not win. I could not win. And you're right, when he believed in something, he really believed in it. And another example was that instance in 1991, when the ANC had its first conference inside the country. And then Comrade Slovo and Nelson Mandela tried to say there must be a third position reserved for females in the NEC. And Terra said, no, we cannot do that. He said our people are good enough to be able to decide which females are best suited to be in the NEC. And he defied just about everybody, including Nelson Mandela and Slovo. So when he believed in something, he did. I went to Fort Hare as varsity, and obviously that time Terra was a marked man. They were banned with Muntu and the rest of them, but they still managed to visit us at these university colleges. And Terra was adamant that, and at that time, everything was quiet. Nelson Mandela had been in jail for more than 10 years. There was nothing happening. And Terra said, we will be free, and we will be free in our own lifetime. And he really believed in that.
And a man of conviction, he, of course, during the SASO days,
yes,
very active, also took over from Nkgopotshe Tiro.
Yes.
And that's ultimately what led to his first incarceration on Robben Island.
Yes, and then that is also when he became quite prominent as a student activist or as a politician, if you choose. Because before that, he was a famous footballer, playing for a team in Claremont called the Claremont Home Defenders. And it was during that time, then now, he became known. Because I think there was, before them, there was Steve Biko and Bani Pichanas of this world. And then this was now the second layer of leadership that emerged. And Terra made most of us to want to be. Firstly, he was a hero in that he played football. So everybody wanted to be associated with him. And secondly, because Terra, by the way, was also a very committed Catholic person. So he was most of the things that people liked in a person. And I know at the time, I don't think he was ever the president of SASO, but he was the most visible of all the people who were in leadership positions then. And then all of us then we were drawn to this thing, primarily because of him.
And then, of course, the Vaal uprisings in the mid-'80s,
yes,
which then ultimately led to his incarceration and one of the accused in the Delmas Trial that landed him on the island for a second time.
Yes. You know, it was quite interesting because when I was arrested myself, I stayed with a fellow who became an Askari. And he also tried to recruit me to be an Askari. And then I saw this fellow testifying in Terra's trial. And I just didn't know how did this happen because he never knew Terra. But then I got to learn later that what they would do to you once you've agreed to work with them, then they would commit you so that you can no longer change your mind. And then they committed this fellow and made him testify against Terra. And then when he came to Robben Island, it was like freedom for all of us, because he came, he was with Popo and Gcina Malindi, and I remember there was a medical officer who was, we call him Major General Kaminga, and Terra was very mischievous. He would break rules and travel to other sections, and I remember Kaminga said to him one day, "But why are you doing this? Don't you know that these things are not done here?" He says, "No, I'm new here. I don't know this place." "I'm new here. I don't know this place. I don't know where the boundary is." So really, we will miss him. We will really miss him. Especially, I will miss him. Lately, we've really been very close with. He had a house in Durban, which he wanted to sell. He asked me to try and see if I can help him to sell that house. We had a joint 70th birthday, Tokyo and I. He was a star in that birthday party. And then obviously, I've been, I know you are an Arsenal supporter. I've traveled with him to go and watch Man U and Arsenal. We've done so many things. He introduced me to hunting. On weekends, we would go anywhere in Limpopo, Northwest, Namibia, hunting. But obviously now we are all in our 70s. We no longer have the energy to do that. But really, I also have learned quite a lot from him. I learned quite a lot and how to deal with situations. Because Terra that was another thing about him. He was a great, great teacher. And it didn't matter who you are. Recently, we went to visit, I think he must be one of the oldest surviving veterans of the ANC, Comrade Chulo, who lived in Soshanguve. We went to see him. He's so old, he recognized her, he didn't recognize me. But this is what he does. Whenever you tell him there is a comrade who is not well, Terra would make sure that you visit that comrade. I know that in the end he left us and formed COPE and was part of that, but almost all of us, I was talking to Jeff Khatebe the other day, almost all of us, we never had that thing that Terra is no longer in the with the ANC.
Because he remained one of you till the end. He
remained one of us till the end.
Mr. Peter-Paul Ngwenya, we are also joined now virtually, as we had promised earlier, by another friend and comrade of Mosiuoa Lekota's, Thabiso Ratsomo. Thanks so much for your time, and welcome to this discussion here on Morning Live, as we pay tribute to a man who, you know, has woven himself into the fabric of this democratic society that we live in. But Mr. Ratsomo, you were, I think, accused number 22 in that Delmas treason trial, and Terra Lekota, Mosiuoa Lekota was, I can't remember now, was he accused number 6, 5? But how did you get to know him?
He was, can you hear me, Sakina?
I can hear you.
Okay, sorry for my difficulties in joining. But quickly, I first met Terra when we were in prison as a comrade, you know, as Paul was saying that we played soccer with him and so on. And I found him to be somebody who is very keen on learning, first of all, about the history of the struggle and so on, and on imparting it to other people. So he played a big role in that education. And, you know, I just want to say, as we are approaching June 16, 50th anniversary of June 16, some of the questions we must be asking ourselves as we lose people like Mr. Lekota is, how do we impart this knowledge that he has and other people to our children? Because that knowledge gets lost over time, and many of us are not writing any books about it. So it's one of those things that are concerning, for instance, that what are we going to do with that kind of knowledge? So we were together in the Delmas trial. He was accused number 20, and then I think it was very clear that the judge wanted to sentence particularly the DWDF people to death. And we shared some of those things, you know, about what the judge was doing and so on. But that is a history that we have, that through that time, we shared a lot of information, and the younger people who were there from the VAL and so on. So that's how I got to know him. Then I also worked with him in the Department of Defense. I was the head of the ministry for a long time. And when he left to join COPE, I remained behind because after the last cabinet that was chaired by the former President Thabo Mbeki, he wrote a resignation letter. So I was there with him all that time because as the head of the ministry. So more or less in short, that's what maybe I wanted to say, and maybe allow you to ask if you need another clarity or want to put another question.
Yes, please, because Mr. Ngwenya was sharing with us, his reflections, his memories of the person that Mosiuoa Lekota was. So during that time, when the courage of his conviction moved him to resign as not just a minister in the cabinet of then President Mbeki, but also a member of the African National Congress. What was his state of mind? What did he say to you at that time about what troubled him most?
Look, basically, if you remember, there was a case that was presided over by Judge Nicholson, which mentioned certain things about what happened and so on. And therefore, President Mbeki was being accused of certain activities that he did outside the constitution. So Terra's point was that the cabinet operates as a collective. So if President Mbeki was guilty of anything, then they're all guilty. So they couldn't live there, leave him alone. So that's why in solidarity, he resigned. But also, we must also say that there were obviously problems within the ANC at that time and so on. And some of those problems actually led to him resigning. I just want also to reflect on his leadership and say, he represents, when you talk about the 1976 generation, the 1976 generation was really based on some of the things they did. For instance, at SASO, South African Student Organization, Black People's Convention, and so on. So his transition from Black consciousness and joined the ANC was really an understanding that how the struggle was being conducted and so on, and that at a particular period, the one that is normally called the silent 60s after the Rivonia trial, for instance, there seemed to be a lull. And at that time, it is that time when SASO was formed, when the BPC was formed and other organizations. But there were two liberation organizations that were in existence at that time. And therefore, he felt that it was time to transcend now into the ANC. And he did play, as I say, a big role. I worked with him also when he was the national chairperson of the ANC, but also from the office side, not from the political side. He is somebody, who is very keen, as I said, to sharing education, to sharing knowledge, to developing people, and so on. And that's why I'm saying this is a challenge that we are probably facing now, how to impart this knowledge, for instance, how to retain the history so that the same generation that we're having now can be inspired by those things that they did in the 60s to resuscitate the struggle and show the commitment that they showed. For instance, if you look all the way from Abraham Tiro, Steve Biko, the SASO 9 and so on, we can see people are committed to live up to the ideals of a free South Africa. So that is, I think, the legacy that, among others, is living for us.
30 seconds, Mr. Peter-Paul Ngwenya. What do you think Mosiuoa Lekota would want to be remembered as or for? How would he like for his legacy to be taken forward by South Africans?
I think wherever he is, he would like to be remembered as a person who had a great love for his people and who wanted South Africa to be the best country on earth.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much, and no doubt looking forward to hearing more from the two of you and Mosiuoa Lekota's other friends throughout this week, as no doubt the country will continue to pay tribute to a fallen hero. That was Mr. Peter-Paul Ngwenya, Mosiuoa Lekota's friend and comrade, and we were also joined by Thabiso Ratsomo, who was also one of Lekota's friends, and Delmas Trial Co-accused, reflecting on his political career.